There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so the people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and whatever will be has been before, and God will call the past to account.
Turn, 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 Time is an issue, being late an occupational hazard. For some, it is the unforgivable sin. Time, we need more of it. 8 days a week would be good, as the Beatles suggested. And time is quite clearly the dominant theme of the first half of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 that we just read. We've been discovering how this book looks at different aspects of life to discover the meaning of life. And obviously, no commentary on life would be complete without some reflection, some conversation, some thoughts regarding time. It's like we're in a crowded rail station at rush hour. Those ginormous clocks overhead, the hands ticking, tick, tick, tick. Some of us sprint to catch the train, late again, and we breathlessly sing, "It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog." Others stand still, staring at the departure board, not at all certain of where the platform is, not at all certain of where they should go, and we're singing, of course, "Help, I need somebody, help." Not just anybody, help, I know I need someone, help. Still others, confident and patiently wait for the scheduled train, even if unsure if it'll be late or early. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, "Let it be." Well, Solomon, he steps into the busyness, the uncertainty, the unpredictable scene, and he provides this piercing reflection on time's inescapable grip. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, he writes. A time to be born and to die, to plant, to uproot, to love, to hate, to wage war, to seek peace. Some see these verses as sheer poetry, sort of music to our ears, a wonderful reminder to react appropriately in every situation. So in the business meeting, we ought to remember verse 7, a time to be silent and a time to speak. Now, there's advice that could have saved many a young executive in their career. And then more obviously, when your friend gets fired from being a rather vociferous young executive, remember verse 4, that it's a time to mourn and certainly not the time to laugh. Wise words about how we use our time. Is that what this is? Well, it sounds all right, but it just doesn't work. Yes, this is poetry, but it's not the sort of poetry you'll see, say, on the shelves of Hobby Lobby to give you this warm, fuzzy feeling when you read it. Because look at verse 3, a time to kill. And verse 8, a time for war, a time to hate. This is not a series of mini thoughts to remind us to act in the right way at the appropriate time, because it's never the time to hate and never the time to kill. No, these first 8 verses of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 demonstrate how we are captives of time, how time controls us rather than we it. Look at how these verses begin in verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die. Those are activities that you and I have very little say over. I didn't choose when to be born, and apart from the obvious exceptions, most of us don't choose when to die. But you see verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die. I don't decide those things. A time to be born. In January of this year, a Texas couple welcomed into this world a newborn son from the back of an Uber during a chaotic rush to the hospital. Apparently, a rare winter storm forced the birth to happen in the back of the Uber, and the driver acted as the midwife. They didn't choose that wild timing. Time and weather did. A time to die. I recall reading one of those tragic stories in a newspaper about a father who drowned trying to rescue his 4-year-old son who had fallen into the river. And there was some underground tunnel that swept the father down to where he got caught in the weeds. And by the time they found him, they couldn't revive him. What made the tragedy even worse was that the boy had already been rescued by his brothers. Verse 2 makes it clear then that this chapter is not a series of wise sayings reminding us to react appropriately to different times and in varying circumstances. Verse 2 sets the tone for all these verses. Our teacher presents the stark reality that we're caught in time, that time rules us. And so, verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal. You see, the same farmer or the same shepherd that nurtures and cares for the sheep recognizes that there will come a day when, as so often in the circle of things, it'll be the farmer again, the shepherd again, that takes the knife to the sheep, to the lamb that he loves so much. If you've read any of James Harriot's books, you know that's the case. And verse 3, a time to tear down and a time to build. In September of last year, the very weekend, my in-laws were moving to Asheville. Hurricane Helene devastated parts of North Carolina, destroying homes and businesses. Although Janelle's parents eventually made it into their apartment complex, they had no running water for several weeks. In fact, through a local church, they spent most of the month helping neighbors to rebuild. They didn't choose the hurricane's path. Time and nature forced their hands. And verse 4, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. We've already said that we don't choose when to die, and so it goes without saying that we don't choose when to mourn either. Indeed, if it's up to us, we'd never mourn. Who enjoys grieving? And a time to dance, verse 4, well, I'm noticing that the joints are getting stiffer in the morning, so as far as dancing is concerned, my advice is do it now while you can. Well, again, these are not choices that we make. We don't choose when to mourn. We're forced by time and circumstance. And verse 5, we read a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time when the collector disperses his hoard. And again, verse 5, a time to embrace and a time to refrain. As your future father-in-law will tell you when you're over at the house, I think it's time to refrain, Ecclesiastes 3:5. Take your hands off my daughter, thank you very much. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Ever since my mother was diagnosed with early onset dementia, I've been trying to keep up with any medical developments. I read this past April that researchers from Stanford University were all set with a new Alzheimer's treatment, only to abandon the drug after it failed in late-stage testing. They had to let go of years of work and had to pivot to a new approach. Time and results, not their hopes, dictated the shift. And then verse 8, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Well, it's no surprise that we think of the Israel-Iran war at the moment. Missile strikes and airstrikes have left families on both sides grieving. Iranian missiles hit Tel Aviv, killing citizens and civilians, while Israeli strikes in Tehran claimed lives, including children. No one in those homes chose this time of hatred and war. Time and geopolitics thrust it upon them. Do you see how the teacher is showing us that we're imprisoned in time? There's a time for everything, verse 1, but when you've been around a while, it becomes obvious that someone else has drawn up the timeline. We think we're in control because we could spend time any way we want. But even then, we could only spend it once. And look, the reality is we can't always choose how we spend our time. I may plan to spend this coming summer enjoying a bit of lake life with Janelle and the kids, but if tragedy strikes, it may be, well, a time to mourn or search or mend or heal. Despite my plans, it may be time to give them up. And so we're trapped in this time scale that someone or something else seems to control. Well, as Solomon writes in verse 9, what does the worker gain from his toil? It's the same question that we faced in chapter 1, verse 3. In chapter 1, we saw the cyclical nature of the world. Everything keeps going round and round, and we can't change it. The seasons come and the seasons go. Autumn always follows the summer. Nothing we could do about it. It'll be the same this year. The sun rises and the sun sets. We can't stop it. That was chapter 1. Well, here we move from the cycle of the world's seasons and weather that we can't affect to the marching of time that we can't change. Chapter 3, verse 9. What does the worker gain from his toil? We can't stop time. Time takes its toll on all of us, doesn't it? Well, except perhaps for Keith Richards, who may very likely outlive all of us here. But for the rest of us, time has got us in a chokehold. Time waits for nobody. It has a curious hold over us. We can't beat it. Can't make it go quicker. Think about it when you were a kid. Didn't Christmas Eve feel like it lasted a decade? You'd lie awake, willing the clock to tick faster so you could rip open those presents. Well, that was when you first discovered that you can't make time go any quicker. And you know it now. You ever have a job so boring that it would start at, say, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you think, well, it's got to be close to lunchtime. And then what happens? Well, you look at your wristwatch. I suppose you pull out your phone anymore, but you look at your watch, and you're utterly defeated. It's like 9:30. It's Time's laughing at you. And now as adults, we're begging time to slow down. Those perfect moments, holding your newborn, laughing with friends, the weddings, graduations, they slip away faster than you could say, where did the years go? The lovers know the pain of that, don't they? Those moments that you'd love to bottle, those times you'd like the clock to be suspended so that you could spend that perfect moment forever with your beloved. Time keeps going, leaving us wistful. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before, I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. I suppose I could have asked the question, will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? And we have to agree, verse 10 with the teacher, I have seen the burden God has laid on men. We do feel burdened by it. Sometimes bored because we got too much of it, other times stressed because we have too little. But why does time bother us so much? I mean, it doesn't bother the animals. The family dog is never bothered about time. Old Fido didn't achieve anything in his life, but it didn't bother him. He didn't get depressed about getting older or about his life slipping away. He didn't go through a midlife crisis. He just wandered about, or at least that's how I imagine a pet would act. You'd have to let me know. We as a family are still in mourning over our only pet, Apple the fish. And that fish never achieved anything in its life. You see, animals aren't bothered by time, but they are, of course, just as much trapped in it as we are. Verse 2 is as true for animals as it is for us, a time to be born and a time to die. Why does time burden us so heavily as we read in verse 10? The answer is there in verse 11. Do you see it? Verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. God has set eternity in the hearts of men. And so unlike animals, we know something of eternity. That's the game changer. God has wired us for eternity. Unlike Apple the fish, we sense that there's something beyond the ticking clock. Incidentally, you know that Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. People interpret that sometimes as a claim about who you are as a person. You know, my thoughts define me. It's sort of this pop culture psychology or those self-help books where people take it to mean that their ideas or their beliefs shape their identity. Descartes wasn't saying anything like that. He was simply pointing out that human beings, what makes us human, is that we're conscious of our consciousness. You see, the family dog may in fact recognize each member of the family, but he isn't aware that he's a dog. Verse 11 tells us that God has set eternity in our hearts, making us aware of time's weight in a way animals aren't. We know we exist because we think about it, we worry about it, we even lose sleep over it. The dog might wag its tail at you, but he's not lying awake wondering, am I a good dog? What about the next life? That's why time burdens us. We're conscious of our place in it, yearning for something eternal. And this longing for eternity isn't just a theological idea, it shapes our everyday lives. We are wired to crave something that lasts. I sort of think this is why we binge watch those series on Netflix, to escape time after work. You see, those fleeting distractions, they leave us emptier because God only satisfies that eternal ache. Wrote C.S. Lewis, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. See, our restlessness isn't a curse, it's a compass that points us to God. When we chase eternity in temporary things, fame, pleasure, even memories, we're like our teacher here, chasing the wind. But when we anchor our hearts in God, every moment gains eternal weight. That mundane Tuesday at work, that late night diaper change, that quiet prayer, they're all threads in God's eternal tapestry. He's preparing us for a forever that we can't yet fathom. God is preparing us for eternity by exposing the limitations of time while awakening our need for something beyond. Solomon's great litany, a time to be born, to die, to love, to hate, reveals that we're trapped in earthly time. But this divine spark makes us restless, yearning for a reality unbound by clocks and calendars. And eternity is not endless time. It's a new state of being where we are fully alive in God's presence, free from time. In 1943, while in the grim confines of Tegel prison, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor and theologian, he sat in his cell wrestling with the reality of his imprisonment by the Nazis for his resistance activities. And despite the threat of execution, Bonhoeffer's spirit remained unbroken, and he spent his days writing letters, praying, and conversing with his fellow prisoners. It was in this crucible of isolation and uncertainty that he reflected on eternity. And he says this: eternity is not an unending succession of days, but something like the supreme moment of fulfillment. Inspiring thoughts from a man who would know intimately the brevity of life, because in October of 1944, he was transferred to the Gestapo's high security prison in Berlin, then to Buchenwald concentration camp in February of 1945, and finally to Flossenburg concentration camp. On April 9th, 1945, just weeks before the German surrender, Bonhoeffer was hanged at Flossenburg by order of Hitler. He was 39 years old. Eternity is not an unending succession of days, but something like the supreme moment of fulfillment. We are made for eternity. As a kid, I remember laying in bed thinking about these huge questions, this idea of forever. And in the naked light, I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. And I remember telling a friend, there's got to be something after death. I just can't imagine nothing. Well, now in verse 11 is why I had those thoughts. God has set eternity in the hearts of men and women. Now, since those childhood musings, I've come across it in many other times and many other people. Most obviously when I'm planning a funeral. People who have no interest in anything other than the things of this life are suddenly very interested in eternity when they're faced with death. They say to me, I'm not religious, but I've tried to be good. They're sort of saying, I really have no interest in eternity. I'm really not religious. And then, referring to their loved one, they'll say something like, but he's in a better place now, isn't he? I'll see him again, won't I? You see, eternity matters when we come face to face with death. God has set eternity in our hearts, and we know it instinctively. And that's why the march of time bothers us. Derek Kinder, who we've referenced before, he magnificently describes it like this. He says, we are like the desperately nearsighted inching their way along some great tapestry or fresco in the attempt to take it in. We see enough to recognize something of its quality, but the grand design escapes us, for we can never stand back far enough to view it as the Creator does, the whole and entire from beginning to end, end quote. And you see, that is a brilliant explanation of verse 11. We see the beauty of all that we're living in verse 11, yet we cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. The end of verse 11, we can't make sense of it. Remember, our teacher Solomon is looking at life as if God were not involved. Life under the sun, yeah. Acknowledge that God is there, but concluding that he's there, but he's not really interested in our insignificant lives. Life viewed that way gets us confused. We catch a glimpse of the beauty of the world, verse 11, but verse 11, we can't make head nor tail of it because we're trapped in time. We know there's something bigger because God has set eternity in our hearts. Now, I guess there'll be some here who instinctively know that. Maybe that's why you've been coming to our services over the past few weeks. You sense deep down that you were made for eternity, but you can't quite work it out, and you feel frustrated by that restless deep down inside. Well, if that's you, you're beginning to understand why Augustine prayed this prayer to God. He prayed, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Well, if you have restlessness in your heart, keep coming or talk to me or email me. I would love to tell you more. You see, the point is this. We are made for eternity. That's why time bothers us so much. We can't settle with the thought that not only are we finite, but even how we spend the little time we have, how it's often dictated to us because of the circumstances and situations that we find ourselves in. We hate the obvious conclusion that if nothing is permanent, we're only filling in time. But without God involved, that is what we're left with. Without God involved, the writer says, verse 12, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. Make the most of it while you can. Enjoy yourself. Do the best you can while you can. Have a blast while it lasts. That's the end result without God involved. But add him to the equation, and we read verse 13, everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. The believer accepts the same truth of being driven by time, but not as a stopgap, but as an assignment. It's a gift from God, an allotted portion in time, in life. No, we'll not fully grasp the meaning of everything, but we know God has a purpose. How can I enjoy the temporal things of life? The writer says, look to the eternal, the things that endure forever, verse 14. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so people will fear him. They'll understand him. Look to God who does nothing in vain. His plans need no corrections or amendments, and God exercises his control over the world so that, and you see it there at the end of verse 14, so that people will fear him. They'll understand him. They'll know him. Well, it's the sort of thing we talked about last week. God has put eternity in our hearts so that we're restless with time until we finally turn to him. Because when we turn to him, we then can find satisfaction in our toil, as it says there in verse 13. The pain of time's tyranny, war, loss, broken dreams, and let's be honest, they could feel senseless. But Ecclesiastes assures us that God does in fact have a purpose. And I think of the raw grief of families at funerals, their questions unanswerable. Why this time? Why him? Solomon's words in verse 14, everything God does will endure forever, seems hollow, don't they? And yet over time, grief yields to healing. Every time to weep, every time to mourn are cradled in God's hands. This doesn't erase the pain, but it redeems it. Jesus himself entered time's limits, weeping at Lazarus' tombs, yet his resurrection proved that time's power is broken. When we turn to him, we could then know that the timeline has been drawn up by a loving Heavenly Father, one who astonishingly works all things together for the good of those who love him. He knows how it is, how it will be, and how it has gone before. You see, verse 15, it says, whatever is has already been, whatever will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And that last phrase is so crucial, isn't it? The Heavenly Father calls the past to account. So all the injustices of time will be dealt with one day. Even the hate and the war and the killing of verses 1 through 8, they will be dealt with, nothing overlooked. That is how we deal with the tyranny of time. Look to the Father of eternity, knowing the truth, the certainty, the security of eternity. And that's how we have peace in a world that is far from peaceful. Amen.